ScoreNorth.com.
72 games means 10 less games, 10 less game checks, 5 less home games for each of these teams. And this season will not duplicate it because they're going to be doing it on a tightened schedule. So it's actually going to feel like busier than a regular 82-game schedule. And with the players and owners trying to make up lost money from last season and then this season in the future, I just don't see any reduction in games anytime in the near future. I suppose the asterisk on that could be if there's some sort of mid-season tournament or play-in tournament that becomes part of the schedule that alters the regular season. I guess you could bring it down, but I don't think we're going to see a reduction short term.
Well, that's our guy, Wendy, our friend from ESPN, talking about the news that broke last night. Welcome to Mackey and Judd, by the way. The NBA announced a modified CBA, an agreement and compromise. Keyword there, Major League Baseball. If you're listening, compromise with the players. What a concept. And these things are true now. The season will start in December 22nd. Free agency opens up on November 20th, 2 days after the NBA draft. And the salary cap will basically stay flat at $109 million. It was going to go up probably to 115 or something. It's going to stay flat at 109. Luxury tax, I don't have it in front of me, like 130 million or something. The Wolves technically have 19 million in cap space, but that doesn't count draft picks and restricted free agents like Malik Beasley and development guys like Naz Reid. So anyways, the Timberwolves have the number 1 pick. The Timberwolves are at the center of all kinds of trade speculation. And so we thought it'd be fun to bring our guy, Zach Harper from The Athletic, into the mix here. Zach, you have covered in your past some dark eras of Timberwolves basketball. Yes. Your time at A Wolf Among Wolves and with us at 1500 ESPN back in the day. How ready are you now for a weirdly placed month of action centered largely around the Timberwolves in some ways?
Yeah, I think you could just say I covered the Timberwolves post Kevin Garnett, and that covers the dark times, right? Like that's what covers that. Yeah, the Timberwolves. It's funny because this is like the one draft where getting the number 1 pick is actually kind of a pain. Right? Like normally it's like, oh, we got the number 1 pick. This is great. And this time it's kind of like, oh, come on. Like, let's hope somebody wants to trade up, right? Like you hope that Charlotte falls in love with James Wiseman and they're willing to essentially do the swap that Philly and Boston did a couple of years ago with the Markelle Fultz trade, right? Like here's the 3rd pick. Here's a future number 1 pick. And we'll make the swap. And then you move down and then maybe you feel better about taking someone that you really value there instead of trying to figure out who has the most value at the number 1 pick. And so I know the Timberwolves would love to trade out of there. If they could get a trade of good value for that number 1 pick, but you also don't want to undersell that. But there's no obvious top guy other than maybe James Wiseman. And, he kind of plays the same position as your best player.
So, Zach, is this a draft bad or is there just no clear-cut superstar?
It's actually a really good draft. People are saying that this is a bad draft. It's just a bad superstar draft. But Anthony Edwards might be really good. James Wiseman might be really good. LaMelo Ball might end up being really good. But there are so many wing players. There's so many good backcourt players. There are a couple of very intriguing big men in this draft. But this league is predicated on wings now, right? Like you look at any of these successful teams. They're really good because they have a star, and then they have all these interchangeable wing players behind them. Look at what Miami did. They've got 6 or 7 guys who are like 6'8", 6'7", 6'6", who can play 3-4 positions. And so you can go out there with any combination. So you can replenish on wings in this draft. It's just if you're the team with the number 1 pick, you can't take those guys with the pick because none of those guys exist as the top player.
See, this is where it's like. The Timberwolves should just take the number 1 pick and be happy that they have this sort of leverage and they've got an asset they can work with here. But they're also still at a point in their organization where they're trying to figure out who they are. Like they just turned over almost the entire roster last year.
Right.
I don't know if they know what Karl-Anthony Towns is supposed to be in 3 or 5 years. Obviously they're taking a flyer on D'Angelo Russell as a guy with potential superstar upside, but they're still trying to figure out what those 2 guys are together. And they're trying to figure out, is it best to add a 19-year-old kid coming out of 1 year out of high school, or is it best to trade that asset for an established player? So I guess my question to you, Zach, is how do you personally feel about the current Timberwolves infrastructure and framework from Gerson to Ryan to Cat to D'Lo and that as a jumping off point for their decisions here?
I love Gerson. I think he's extremely smart. I think if he's allowed to do what he's supposed to do, you have to think like he's taking over a team that, had a number 1 guy, right? Like Carl's a number 1 player. Like you'd like him to be a better number 1 player by playing defense, but a guy that talented, like that's That's really hard to get. So you figured out that hurdle. On top of that, you have a lot of flexibility. You just don't have a ton of assets. You don't have a ton of like really great trade pieces. And so when they get D'Angelo Russell, okay, you get another all-star guard. Like D'Angelo Russell's really good. The problem is none of those guys play defense, right? And so I think if you allow Gerson to execute this plan probably takes like 3 or 4 years, which doesn't like that's the problem, right? Is you're trying to fix 30 years of crap in a year. That doesn't happen. Like that just doesn't happen in the NBA. You have to have these pieces. I think the best way to maybe look at like the biggest pie in the sky, right? The Golden State Warriors were crap for about 25 years. And they had good young pieces. They had Steph Curry. Monte Ellis wasn't that young anymore, but he was at least productive. They had, they just drafted Klay Thompson. Like they had good pieces. And then they got a new ownership group. And then all of a sudden they started doing things the right way. And now they're the standard, right? Even though they kind of fell off last year. That's the ideal for when a new owner takes over, is that happens. It's just that takes some time to do.
In your perfect world, if you ran the Wolves, Zach, what would you do? What would be your moves as far as the draft goes, and also possibly beyond that, roster construction?
I mean, I would definitely just try to get interchangeable, right? Like I think that's what you need to do. You need to recognize this is the league of wings. Like great if you have a point guard, great if you have a big man. Everyone else needs to be interchangeable, 6'8", can hopefully shoot a 3 and play some defense, especially around those two guys with Cat and D'Lo. I would take James Wiseman with the number 1 pick. I think he's the best player. I know that he's the same position as Karl, but they're actually both very versatile in the way they play. Now, you don't know if either of them are going to end up being defenders, but James Wiseman is so big. He's so athletic. He has a lot of skill. He can shoot the ball. He just didn't get a chance to show it in college because he only played a couple of games. And when he was in high school, he was playing with a bunch of guys who wouldn't give him the ball. That's the crazy thing. It's like he wouldn't get the ball in high school. And it reminds me a little bit of Karl at Kentucky, where they wouldn't let him shoot jumpers, right? John Calipari wouldn't let him shoot jumpers because he says, you got to show you can score on the block. He wouldn't let Devin Booker run pick and rolls because no, you're just a shooter. That's what you're going to do. James Wiseman can do a lot. And I would take him, and at least you have 2 extremely talented big men. Both of them are valuable trade chips, and you can fill in around there and say, hey, maybe we'll just play zone all the time. Maybe we'll own the boards. Maybe we're not going to be able to defend all that well, but good luck defending us. And at a certain point, you need an identity, and their identity right now may just be we score 135 points a night and hopefully only give up 130.
Yeah. I mean, if they trade, it kind of feels like I'm sure they've kicked the tires on Ben Simmons. I would hope that they would have called Washington about, somebody needs to free Bradley Beal at some point. He's like 28 or something now. Like he needs to play for a higher upside team. So my guess is they probably shot those shots behind the scenes. Are there any other intriguing, like swap a first round pick with the Knicks or with Atlanta? John Collins' name has come up. Are there any other trades where you might trade out of the first, not for a superstar, but for like, a later top 10 pick and a good complementary piece that intrigue you?
I mean, someone who's gettable, and actually you could trade. I think they have their first round pick is Indiana. If they don't have it this year, you can maybe get next year's. But I would try to trade for Victor Oladipo. He's not fully healthy. He still has to prove that he's healthy. But if the medicals on him are okay, he's in the last year of his contract, so you worry that it's a rental. But if you can get him to lock in long term, you give him a max deal. He does really want to go to Miami, so that's a problem. But if you can get Victor Oladipo, now you have a guy who can complement both those guys. He's a good defender. He can set a tone that way. Problem is he's just rarely healthy. But if you're looking to move that pick for a veteran, Oladipo is available. I just think that the Ben Simmons thing's not going to get done unless you're giving up D'Angelo Russell. And I don't know that that's a good deal. Even though Ben Simmons is a better player, I don't know that that's a good fit. And then outside of that, Beal is going to take a lot more than they can offer up, especially since that first round pick is probably going to Golden State. Well, actually, I don't know about probably. The Wolves are going to be the worst team in the West this year. And that's going to frustrate a lot of Wolves fans, but the West is just that good. And so maybe you land in the top 3 with that pick and you get to keep it. And that's the draft you want to keep it. But yeah, you have the potential to move some assets and get some veterans. It's just everyone's a little gun shy with that right now.
Oh, good. A bad Wolves team. Off your point though. So is the smart move to try and make moves to attempt to win as soon as possible, or to what you just said, which is if you're Gerson, say, you know what? We're bad, but we've been bad for a long time. And so I am going to construct this thing so we potentially actually have a chance to pop for a significant amount of time in 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to win now. There's no move they could make to be a good team now, right? Like those guys aren't available. And so even if they got Bradley Beal, they'd be good, but you couldn't guarantee that they were going to make the playoffs. That's just how good the Western Conference is. And so I would plan everything for 2 years from now. Like, we need to be good, not next season, not the season after that, but that third season coming up. We need to not be good, just good, but like ready to become a top 4 team, right? And you're just building slowly and slowly. I know Timberwolves fans do not want to hear that. You've been building slowly for 3 decades, but that's really the lay. That's really the lay of the land in the Western Conference. The problem is you get a little bit of a ticking time bomb with D'Lo's contract and Karl's contract. But I do think you have the opportunity to really pounce at that moment. And, the Lakers should be lessened by then because all they'll have is Anthony Davis. And we've seen what that looks like. It looks like the Pelicans when LeBron's not involved, right? Like you'll see the Clippers may not be together at that point. Like you will have teams coming down. The Warriors won't be as good at that point as they're coming down. And I just think that you have to recognize we can try to win now and then not do it and then frustrate everybody, or we can stick to our plan, build properly, and try to be not just good, but a powerhouse when that corner turns.
Do you think there's any other, just away from the Timberwolves for a second, with how rushed this offseason is going to be and just the weird timing of it, is this going to be a more mellow free agency and trade period, or do you think we're going to see some fireworks of some kind? Like, what's the most reckless thing that happens on November 20th?
Free agency is going to be very mild because there aren't very many good free agents, right? Anthony Davis resigns, and then after that, it's like, ooh, do we want Montrezl Harrell? Trust me, you don't. He's not that good. And so after that, unless you're really after Fred VanVleet, I think trades are going to be crazy. Like, free agency won't be, but I think trades, the luxury tax not going up, that threshold not going up hurts teams a little bit. They were expecting it, but I believe the league is also lessening that tax bill, so maybe they'll feel better about making some moves. But it's hard to add money to a team when there's no cap room. It's easy to move money around, and that's what trades are. Trades are just moving money around. So I think Chris Paul gets dealt. I think Russell Westbrook might get dealt. I think Jrue Holiday might get dealt. That's actually the move. If the Wolves want to make a really good move, I would try to trade for Jrue Holiday. Jrue Holiday.
You want reckless speculation?
You know this ain't gonna happen.
How about reckless trade speculation?
For the love of God!
There it is. I think you want Jrue Holiday. You can play him next to D'Angelo Russell. He's actually more comfortable off the ball than he is as a point guard. He is a great defender. He is a real leader on and off the court. He is a guy that everyone respects. Like when he didn't make the all defensive team, every player around the league was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like how? And granted, I screwed up by not putting him on my all defensive team. He was the last one I left off. But every player around the league was like, "Have you seen this guy?" Just because they're bad defensively doesn't mean he's not deserving. Like, he is a great, great role model for everyone. He could bring those guys up to speed.
So what's the trade then?
What would it take?
Yeah, come on.
So
Go all the way with this reckless speculation.
So
not halfway.
It's gonna take a draft pick, right? Probably this number one. Here's what I think. I think if the Wolves trade down in the draft, because I wouldn't trade the number one for him, but if they trade down, you could trade that pick. You could trade James Johnson in his expiring deal because you're assuming he's picking up the player option. And then I don't know, maybe like a Josh Okogie or a Jarrett Culver, right? Which sounds like a lot, especially because it could be a 1-year rental for Jrue after this season. But man, I'm telling you, he's worth it. He's that good.
Yeah, I love it. I'm here for it.
That was good.
What's
reckless
up, man?
speculation.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
And I guarantee it's going to happen. Oh, wait, no, that's too reckless.
Now you've gone way too far.
That's our friend Zach Harper bringing some reckless speculation to the table. We appreciate you joining us, man. This is good. It's such a weird because the NFL is going to be in full swing and college football still. So we'll see if the NBA can. The NBA has a perfect island in July to do all of this in normal years and to have it be the headline for like 3 weeks And so I don't know how much it's going to get drowned out with no top name free agents, but we'll see how it goes.
I just know some big trade is going to happen on Thanksgiving, and I'm going to have to work when I'm half drunk and way too full. I just know that's going to happen.
You're going to be taking a nap.
Yeah, it's gonna, wake up! Chris Paul got traded.
Yeah.
All right, Zach. Thanks for joining, man. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right, that's Zach Harper from The Athletic, and he got his start at A Wolf Among Wolves as a Timberwolves blogger about 10 years ago. So good stuff. Hey, because Jay Will is expected to join us too, so let's keep it here and just sort of piggyback off this. I love that, like all the things that he brought up. Let's start with the James Wiseman thing, all right? And none of us are sitting here having like watched all the film or anything, but just the concept of it's possible that the best player for the Wolves to draft, according to Zach Harper and other smart people, is a guy that doesn't necessarily fit perfectly with the roster in that he is a 5. Karl-Anthony Towns in the modern NBA is a 5.
Yep.
And that is it a situation where they don't really mesh very well together on the court? Can the Wolves get creative? And I think my question is, are the Wolves in a spot where they should be looking to put the perfect pieces around Cat and D'Angelo Russell, even if it's not the best available player? Or should they just be in the business of drafting the best available player, and then if they have to trade somebody later on, figure it out? I tend to go with the latter. I think, or is it the former? The second one. I tend to go with the second one, the latter.
The latter.
That they should just take the best asset available and then figure it out down the road if needed.
Sure. Now, Dukes has said a couple times on the scoop with us that the Wiseman camp doesn't want their client here, which could be a problem there.
Yep.
But I mean, this sport, to be clear, and I get that you do not want guys with completely redundant skill sets, but this sport has become more and more positionless, correct?
Yeah, and that's what Zach was saying. Just you want
so like the
interchangeable
whole
guys.
thing of that's my point guard, that's my 2 guard, is a little bit more
That's my quarterback.
flexible now. My quarter, that's James Wiseman. But I do think that if the Wiseman camp doesn't want to be here and that's going to become an issue, that probably could be a problem.
Yeah, but here's the other thing. How many people are really dying to be here? I mean, and it's not a knock on Gerson or Ryan.
I guess there's a difference between if you actively tell me that you don't want to play here or possibly won't, as opposed to, well, I'll play there.
Some of that too, I hear you. Some of that too is eradicated when you give them more money than they would get because they're the number 1 overall pick, right? You know, it's like, do you want more money? You want to be the number 1
pick?
Sure,
yeah, that's true.
And then if you're, Ryan Saunders and Gerson Rosas, those guys can get in a room. It's not like David Kahn walking in a room and trying to convince somebody and he's just a weirdo. I think you've got people that are smart, people that come from credible backgrounds in this case. It's not like Glenn Taylor's going to be sitting down with James Wiseman saying, all right, I need you to look me in the eye and promise me things before I give you, the number 1 pick in a van down by the river.
You got lazy on the basketball court.
I would just say if James Wiseman and his camp are saying, listen, guys, we'd really rather be anywhere else, I actually wouldn't let that deter me because I think you can change some of that once you get him in the door. Because the perception is going to be the same for a lot of people. Like if you were to pull all these players, hey, Ball family, where do you want to send your kid? Where does Minnesota rank? It ain't going to be top 5.
I do think that the fact that, as Zach said, though, that this draft does not have a clear-cut top pick, but it's a deep, pretty good draft, does bode well for if you do trade back, let's say, to 3.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a big difference between no clear-cut superstar and bad draft.
That is correct.
And his point is, this is not a bad draft. It's just not one with a guy who you say is a generational player who you have to take 1.
Yeah. Now, some people are saying that James Wiseman might actually turn into that type of a guy, that he might be if he develops a shot and whatnot. I mean, the guy is one of the best in terms of just inside scorers and defensive shot blocker types. Like if he can add a shot to that skill set,
sure.
Now all of a sudden we're talking about a guy that could maybe carry a franchise. And so that's if you're the Wolves and you look at James Wiseman and say, man, we could teach that guy to shoot threes and he would be blocking 5 shots a game and he'd be scoring in the paint. Like that's a better player than Towns if you can teach him how to shoot, but we'll see.
I think the most important thing is whoever eventually buys this team from Glenn as part of the agreement gets this franchise transferred, not out of town, to the Eastern Conference. Chicago and Milwaukee are your rivals, okay? And you're out of the Western Conference. How long have we been politicking to get out of the Western Conference?
Yeah. Do you buy what Zach said, which is
They could be the worst team.
that they could be the worst team in the Western Conference again?
I don't know enough about the bottom to say I buy it completely, but does it surprise me he said that? Not really.
I mean, listen, the West obviously.
Can't they be second to last though?
Well, what's the difference at that
There's
point?
not. I'm
Well,
just
that's
being a
where they were
smart.
last year.
I'm being a smart ass.
Yeah. So just to give you
Third
sort
to
of
last.
a lay of the landscape. So, obviously there's the 8 playoff teams. Are any of those teams looking to take a nosedive? Houston could. If Houston trades Russell Westbrook,
Yep.
They just went through a major shakeup. Obviously, Daryl Morey is gone as the GM. So I could see Houston taking a bath. But are they going to take like a 20-game swing downward if James Harden is still their best
If James
player?
Harden gets hurt, yes. If he doesn't, probably not.
Oklahoma City looks like they could take a step back, especially if they make some trades. Utah's not going anywhere. Dallas is on the rise.
Yep.
I don't think Portland's necessarily going to take a nosedive. And then you look at some of the other teams like Memphis has some great young talent. Phoenix has great young talent. San Antonio is at least put together enough to not be terrible. Sacramento has great young talent. The Pelicans have great young talent.
So your point is Zach's
Warriors.
exactly. So what he's saying is Zach Harper's exactly right.
And actually, there were only 2 teams that didn't win 30 games or more in the West last year: the Timberwolves and the Warriors, which get all of their Hall of Famers back.
All right,
this season.
that's my point. How about getting this franchise to the East stat?
Yeah, I mean, well, here's the other way to look at it too. If obviously the Wolves aren't built out like some of these other teams, but they do have their 2 young star players. They do have Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell. So if even without like a great rest of the roster, if they finish with 20 wins again with those 2 guys, do you start to question those 2 guys? I do.
It just hit me. The plan just hit me.
Oh,
Expansion candidates are easy. Las Vegas and Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are not Eastern Conference teams, gents. Last time I looked, they are way west.
Oh, so you're going to have to move
That means
a
you've
team
got to
the
move
East.
a team. That means someone's got to get out.
So let's say because Memphis seems to be the team that's most likely to move to either Las Vegas or Seattle. So if Memphis
Or
moves,
expansion.
if Memphis move, well,
This
that's a
league's
good
going to
point.
need an influx of cash.
So here's what could happen. You could expand by 2 teams.
Yeah.
Okay. You move Memphis. Actually, the Wolves could be moved to one of these
they really
markets.
could.
too.
Okay, I'm guarding against that because you are not wrong.
Let's say Memphis moves to Seattle.
Okay.
And Vegas is an expansion team.
Okay.
So you expand by 1. Actually, they would probably expand by 2. And if they do that, you're right. They would have to move a team to the
Or 2.
Eastern Conference.
And I'm just saying that the Wolves would fit in perfectly in a division with the Chicago Bulls and Milwaukee Bucks.
Memphis would be the other team if they kept their franchise that would probably be a candidate to move to the Eastern Conference, right? Isn't Memphis an
Yes.
Eastern time zone?
Yes. They would be a candidate.
Interesting.
But I think the loss of cash during the pandemic is going to make this league look long and hard at straight expansion for
Mhm.
big paydays. And Vegas and Seattle make perfect sense. And if you could get an influx of cash from people moving or putting expansion teams in those towns, it makes perfect sense.
I like it. Yeah, because the Eastern Conference last year had all of the tanking teams. So while the Western Conference only had 2 teams that didn't win 30, and one of them is a dynasty that still hasn't breathed its last breath,
Yes.
the Eastern Conference had 7 teams that fell below the 30-win mark. And then even a couple playoff teams that were well below 500. But that's the way the Eastern Conference has always been. Anyways, I would say the only thing I would say is if you're going to draft at number 1, draft the best possible asset. Don't worry about fit yet.
Mhm.
And if you're going to trade, I don't think you should be like I love the Jrue Holiday idea, but I think you should be trading for like a 4-year window. I don't think you should be trading for like a jolt this season.
Sure.
Because you're just going to run into a brick wall in the Western Conference.
Sure.
So quick pause and then more Mackey and Judd.